Hey, what's up, all you art geeks out there? Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about finding new colors for your artwork. This is something I obsess about, is finding new colors for each piece of artwork that I create. I do tend to repeat a few colors here and there, but I'm always trying to find new combinations. I'm trying to find new color harmonies. I'm trying to find new color compositions. I'm trying to find a lot of different things in the world of color. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I thought I'd talk about some of these today as far as how you can search for new colors for your artwork. I think this conversation will apply to just about any style of artwork, any kind of artwork, from abstract to representational to anything out there. Now, while we're talking about this, or while I'm talking about this, I'm going to be showing you a painting I just recently created where I did use some new colors. Now, I'm sure if I look through all of the paintings I've created over the past 10 years, I'll probably find something similar to these colors, but I had a goal in mind with this particular painting, and that was to apply some colors from another artist that I found online that had some really interesting atmospheric colors that he likes to use. And that's how I came up with these colors. So now, before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention that I do have a Patreon account with a bunch of oil painting tutorials that focus mostly on the portrait. There's a lot of exercises on there. I get into a lot of different colors, which is what we're talking about today. And there's some art downloads as well. So check that out. Now let's go ahead and start talking about this subject of finding new colors for your artwork. Now, there's a lot of different ways to go about this. I'm just going to really talk about my particular methods. Then I'll talk about some methods I found online that people suggest. But for me, when I am trying to search for new colors, one of my go-to methods to find new colors is to go to Photoshop. So what I like to do is I will go into Photoshop with a photo that I've taken of one of my models, and I will just start playing around with the color balance. I'll start playing around with color temperatures. I'll look for different ways to apply those colors to different tones within the photograph. And that's kind of a basis for starting the inspirational process of getting colors for my portraits, because when I create a portrait, I like to consider it more like an abstract painting in a lot of ways, where I don't like to be confined by the skin tones that I see. I like to sort of build up my own colors. Now, if it's colors I'm familiar with, I will usually just go into Photoshop, maybe crop it down to what I want and start from there and keep it simple and do some experimenting on the actual painting surface. But for bigger paintings, I do find that conceptualizing in Photoshop is helpful. It saves a little bit of time, it saves some paint, and I can get a good idea of where I want to go with a particular painting I'm working on. Now, the second method that I think relates to my initial method of getting into Photoshop and just kind of winging it with different colors is my Instagram account. I love to look at my feed of artists. I follow a bunch of different artists on Instagram, and they all give me a lot of inspiration for different colors. And I think that's one of the other areas where I find new colors, is I'll see somebody else creating a painting with certain colors. There are certain painters I look at for inspiration in landscape and portraits and abstract. There's all kinds of artists that I have in my feed. They all give me some different sort of inspiration, and they'll lead me one way or another for the next painting. And on certain days, I'll be looking at one artist and go, wow, those are some interesting colors. I'll check those out. This painting in particular that you're watching me paint today, this one was inspired by an artist named Remo Leinhard. Hopefully I'm saying his name correctly, but he does a lot of interesting landscape paintings for the most part. And his work really comes from an environmentalist point of view. I really appreciate the way he talks about how we're ruining our world with pollution and just the way we put our footprint on everything around nature. So check him out for sure, Remo Leinhard. He's got some really interesting artwork. Now, when I was looking through his feed, he was using quite a few oranges and greens lately, but I was looking at his website and I was like, wow, those are some interesting colors, where he had some kind of blue and orangish red accents going on. And I thought, okay, well, that's some colors I really haven't used before. I think I'll use that for inspiration. And that's where this painting has led me. This is just the first pass, by the way, of this painting. There's going to be more coming soon where there's an overlap of color on top of it. But for this first layer, I want to keep the colors fairly simple and just get a nice loose drawing of the portrait and then add some color on top of it on the second layer. But as far as what I was trying to accomplish was to find those colors that he was using, at least some sort of variation of them, and see where it went. And I really like this particular color palette. It's one I'll probably use again here and there, but I find that getting inspiration from other artists is such a great way to find new colors. And I may end up combining artists into one painting. There's a lot of different ways to find inspiration, but that, as far as finding new color, that's my second favorite way to find new colors for my work. I find that I get so bored with using the same colors over and over. I'm always searching for a new color palette, and I love to use artists for that reference point to get me started. I've seen a lot of other ways that people like to create their color inspiration. A lot of the time, the old school way to do it before technology, before Instagram, before Photoshop, would be to look at color books. Look at books that give you inspiration. They would call these color theory books, maybe. There's a lot of books that get into how colors interact, how colors complement each other. Interior designers use these when they're designing the interior of different spaces. It can really help with a lot of different things, looking at color theory books and looking at palettes from other artists. But books out there, that's a good old school way to do it. If you're into books, you want to check it out that way. Now, I like to look at artists. I like to look at all those colors put together on the surface. That's where I maybe jump that step of looking at a book of just individual swatches. I'd rather look at how that was applied to an actual painting. I feel like that gives me a bit more inspiration for me, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. I would say that one of the things to really keep track of, though, is try to keep your colors associated with a tone. I think that's a great way to really help you find new inspiration, is to not overcomplicate things by having a bunch of different colors within the same sort of range of tone. Another old school way to get inspiration is when every month I have a meeting with a bunch of other painters and we show our work and we get critiqued. And I find that I get quite a bit of inspiration just from looking at other artists' work. After you get to know the artists and see their work over and over again, you get to kind of get a sense of what colors work and don't work. And a lot of that sort of subconsciously gets put into my brain for the next piece of work, or maybe it's the composition. But there's a lot of things just by looking at other people's work, seeing them talk about their work, that I find pretty inspirational when it comes to creating work later on. Now, to bounce back over to how to find new colors in the digital world, I think Photoshop's a great one, but there's so many different apps out there that can really affect color differently. I find that my ArtFlow app on my phone, when I take a painting, maybe an existing photo of a painting of mine, I desaturate the colors down to black and white, and then I change the colors in ArtFlow. It affects colors a little bit differently than it does in Photoshop. There's other apps where you can just paint right over top of your old paintings with different colors and see what may or may not work. There's a lot of great ways to quickly test things out without having to actually use paint. When I wake up sometimes and I have a free moment while I'm eating breakfast, I'll just pull my phone out and I'll paint over an old painting digitally with my little stylus and just test some things to see if they work or not. That's another great way to find new colors outside of actually being in my studio and painting on an actual surface. I think one of the final ways to really do this, and it's one of the most obvious, is just to simply experiment. And there's so many different ways to experiment with color. If you have an old painting that you hate, paint over it with some oil ground, let it dry, and then use that to test some things out. Maybe use just a scratch piece of oil painting paper. Just throw some colors at it and see what happens. Obviously, you're going to be wasting some paint because you're experimenting, but by painting with actual physical paints, I think sometimes is the best way to know what works and what doesn't. There's plenty of times when I've been in Photoshop testing things out and they look good digitally, but they don't really translate to the way I paint personally. So sometimes it doesn't work out. And I've learned from those mistakes. I've learned how Photoshop can just really help with those initial concepts, but it's once you start painting, that's when you really know whether it's going to work for your style or not. Now, as far as experimenting goes, though, with actual paint, this can work for abstract. This can work for just testing out different compositions. This can be great for testing out colors that work and then maybe putting a little dab of that color that you've created into a booklet and saving those colors for later on. I know a lot of people do that where they'll create their own sort of history book of colors that did and didn't work in a little smaller book of some kind. I don't personally do that. I like to just look at my old paintings and use those for reference versus having little swatches of color that I painted into a book. But there's a lot of ways to do it. Now, as far as other ways to figure out colors that you can use that maybe you haven't, it's always good to look at trends, whether it's even in fashion. I mean, you could look at what's big in the fashion world, that can sometimes translate over to a painting. There's trends in a lot of different places like interior design, architecture. You'll kind of get an idea of what colors are trending, and that might actually help with sales as well, just figuring out what colors work. Of course, blue for me always seems to be one of those colors that can outlast any trend. There's so many different shades of blue. There's so many different shades of reds, purples, greens. You can find a lot of colors within certain ranges that you haven't tried before. So don't think that you've just because you've tried a green or a yellow green or a blue green that you've tried every green there is. There's so many different little subtleties that you can try within a certain range of color. And you might find that one color just interacts better with another one on the color wheel. So try those out. Try the books. Try looking at Instagram at all the artists you use as your inspiration. Try Photoshop. Try any digital app that maybe can help you out along the way. But at the end of the day, I think what you got to do is be very true to what you want out of your artwork and make sure that you're trying to do something unique for yourself. Don't try to copy somebody else's palette because you see that they're really famous. They're just great with those colors. That means it'll translate to your kind of art. You need to find your story. You need to find the colors that work with your story. Hopefully this was a good discussion. I don't know. There's a lot of other ways to do it. You can look at different cultures. Every culture uses different color palettes. A lot of different ways out there I haven't even barely touched on. So let me know what you think in the comments. Though. I'm really curious what ways you like to use to find colors for your paintings, whether you're abstract, whether you're representational, it could be still life, portraits, whatever it is. Love to hear from you. Please like and subscribe to this video. That would be awesome. Thank you so much, all you art geeks out there. I will talk to you again very soon. Bye.